Well, welcome everyone to a special edition of Learn Analytics podcast. Today we have a special guest with us, Kyle. He currently works as a senior product manager at Rivian and has also spent time at both Lyft and Shift. At Lyft, he worked as a operations manager, and at Shift, he worked as the head of field ops. It's great to have you, Kyle. How are you?
Good. Yeah. Thanks for inviting me. This is super exciting.
Yeah,
How are you doing?
I'm good. Just wrapped up my day. I know you just wrapped up your day, hopefully too.
Yep.
Uh,
For now.
for now, yeah. But yeah, like super grateful to have you. Hopefully we could bring some new insights to our viewers about operations and product management overall. So maybe you could just tell us a little bit about yourself. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess from the very beginning, right? I graduated from Cal back in 2016. Studied economics, and I was really kind of gearing towards the financial route. Right.
Yeah.
I wanted to go into investment banking and ended up getting an internship at Morgan Stanley doing more so like private wealth management. But I think then I realized that the industry was just very archaic, at least at
Mm,
Morgan Stanley, and it was very traditional, right? And there wasn't a lot of room for innovation or growth was just it seemed very stagnant and linear
mm,
to where I was like a lot more interested in things that, could just kind of accelerate my own career and teach me new things. So at the same time I was working there, I worked at Shift part time on the weekends
mm-hmm.
just for fun because I just love cars, love automotive, love driving.
Got it.
Um, so yeah, so that part time role was actually me being a car enthusiast, which essentially meant I went on test drives with customers who wanted to purchase cars from Shift.
Got it.
Ultimately would drive, let's say, a Honda Civic to someone in Palo Alto. They would test drive the car, and I would tell them about the car, like the
Uh,
condition, ownership history, whatever. Um, and yeah, and ultimately like sell the car. So I was like ultimately a traveling car salesman at that point, but
got it.
obviously in a very tech environment.
Got it. Was that a
Um,
job you applied for, or was that a job somehow you stumbled upon for that, like in very early?
yeah, so yeah, when I was 17, I guess I had a lot of friends who also like cars who shared the same passion.
Mm,
And one of those friends found out about this job at Shift on Craigslist. So then he referred me to that job, and then I ended up just taking it for fun.
got it.
Yeah, but then it kind of ultimately turned into a career for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then beyond, Shift. Obviously, I wore a lot of hats there, but then yeah, like you mentioned, I went to Lyft to help start a rental car program called Lyft Rentals,
Mm-hmm.
ran operations there. And I think ever since COVID, like I think that kind of changed my role a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of had to kind of evaluate, yeah, my current state then, and ultimately made the move to Rivian since I was super excited about the product that they were building.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. No, I mean, it's like all the companies you work for are like pretty exciting to start with. But maybe we could talk about your journey, especially with Shift, right? Because you spent a good amount of time there and really like I'm sure you just grew a lot professionally.
Hmm.
Maybe we could talk more about that. How did
Yeah,
what did you do, and like how did that sort of like change as the company also changed? And
yeah. Um, so when I ended up joining full time, this was like after I graduated. Um, I was I was put in a management role,
mm,
which is very interesting because a lot of people just kind of entered right as individual contributors, as like a car enthusiast at the time.
mm,
But I guess I had like given my experience, like kind of being a part of the operations there, I think the leadership team had a lot of trust in me.
Mhm.
So yeah, when I initially joined full time, I was managing a team of about 15 to 20 people who essentially did the same function of, when a test drive was booked, that car enthusiast on my team would drive a vehicle over to that customer and like walk them through the purchase process.
Mhm.
Um, and that was probably my second real management role beyond just like kind of brick and mortar retail in my teenage years.
Mhm.
Um, so it was super interesting for me, and I think I think leadership is just something that I value a lot, like a ton of my career, and I think it's also like super rewarding for me, and just
Mhm.
intrinsically, just
Mhm.
because you get a chance to obviously like direct people and make sure they're successful at their role. But then I think it evolved a lot for me to become a mentor for a lot of people
Mhm.
and kind of guide them through their career. Um, so yeah, so I think that was like the building block of like, okay, like, shift is not going to just be like a 9 to 5 job for me. Like I'm
Mhm.
going to kind of use this passion I have for leadership and grow it further.
Got it.
Um, and I was like super lucky enough to have a lot of great mentors as well.
Mhm.
So for example, like my manager at the time, um, her name was Anya, and she was a general manager for San Francisco.
Mhm.
Um, I think she saw the value in me and saw like the potential with me. So she spent the time to meet with me, give me a lot of like feedback. Sometimes the feedback was harsh, right? But then I think it was up to me to actually internalize that feedback and action upon it to make sure I
Mhm.
was becoming a better manager.
Mhm.
So I guess fast forward from beyond that, um, I grew into a role where I was operations manager for San Francisco, coming from team lead, and
Mhm.
then ultimately I became head of field operations, basically running all field operations for the company in multiple markets.
Mhm.
So my role kind of grew from managing individual contributors to like managing managers, which is like a whole
Mhm.
different dynamic.
Wow. Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, we'll dive a little bit deeper into your thoughts of what, being on the other side of a hiring manager, right? How can you what type of qualities and what type of skill sets, right? You're looking in a candidate, and how do you help
Hmm.
build them in their career as well, right? We could
Yep.
talk about that too. But so I guess from sort of the field ops side, right? At Shift, you went on and moved to Lyft, right? And was there a sort of a specific reason, or like you just wanted to look for something different, or what got you sort of want to transition to the next path? So.
Yeah. Yeah. It was definitely a hard move for me, just because
Mhm.
I spent 4.5 years there, and like you know completely hats off to a lot of the leadership team that's still there that
Mhm.
kind of helped develop me as a leader, to what I am this day.
Mhm.
I think like the really exciting thing for me at a company is like the 0 to 1 stage of the business.
Mhm.
So, for example, when I joined at Shift, like we were still managing things, like managing appointments on Google Calendar. Like we didn't have an
Mhm.
official scheduling system, and
Mhm.
a lot of things were on spreadsheets, and a lot of the processes that we did were just very manual, right? Like
Mhm.
there was a lot. It was like frustrating at sometimes, but then I think it
Yeah.
leaves a lot of room for like innovation,
Mhm.
figure out how to make things the most efficient. So
Mhm.
I think that's the luster that kind of disappeared as like just any company
Mhm.
grows larger and larger, right? And then yeah, when I moved to Lyft, like the appeal there was okay, where like the role I was interviewing for essentially like you run operations, both the field operations and vehicle operations for a program that hasn't been like even kicked off yet.
Mhm.
So I like that because it was like, okay, like, it's not a business yet.
Mhm.
It's like merely a concept, but then, I think like my role was just more focused on, okay, like getting off the ground, making this concept a reality, and then growing like an amazing team to like deliver a great experience.
Mhm. Got it. Got it. So like a big piece is definitely I like how you painted that picture from 0 to 1. Like it's definitely I could see sometimes it's very frustrating too, just
Hmm.
having work in a sort of a startup atmosphere. But other times it's like you really get to be very agile, right? Like you get to
Hmm.
work with people on various levels and come up with ideas, right, and take it to action. So I think for sure, for sure. So yeah, no, maybe we can switch it to maybe now your current role, right? As sort of a senior product manager at Rivian. So are you still doing like ops related type of role, or is this role sort of different, you would say?
It's different. I would say I still have a lot of overlap with operations, just given my role. So
Mm-hmm.
specifically, my focus is around the transaction and delivery experience of a customer. And obviously Rivian, like, yeah, same thing, right? Where it has the 0 to 1 feel.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't delivered any cars yet, and that's coming in June of next year. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of things that, it's essentially a clean slate and a lot of like memos and ideas on paper, but
Mm-hmm.
ultimately I think myself and like other team members just need to execute it and bring it to life.
Got it.
Um, so with that being said, like since everything's a clean slate and we don't have like live operations delivering cars, that kind of brings me to the question of like, okay, like, how do I build products that work for tools for operations when they don't even have operations yet?
Mm-hmm.
So actually a lot of my role right now in capacity is dedicated to working like hand in hand with operations team and kind of getting alignment with them to ensure that they have like some kind of like operational strategy or
Mm-hmm.
plan in place to where they would basically follow like, okay, like, for delivering a car, they follow this sequence of steps. And then
Mm-hmm.
so that way, like we have a plan of record to work off of. And then basically I can come up with product requirements that fit those, that fit that understanding so that we're building towards the same end goal. That
Got
makes
it.
sense.
Got it. Got it. So because like Rivian is sort of unique in its nature that the product is still needs to be built, right? But like you have to
Hmm.
work with a lot of the planning, right, and a lot of the execution. But you have to craft the plan in order for people to execute,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
but that's awesome though. Like maybe we could talk about a little bit uh, different in terms of like since you worked in all these sort of like great different companies, right, similar domain, right, seems like a bit of operations, a bit of the
Hmm.
product management side, right. I would love to dive in maybe some of our viewers like they are they like to be data savvy, right, but maybe they want to get into more of like you like yourself, like who is a product manager or operations manager, right? I guess one of the questions is how do you use like data, right, for your roles, or how
Yep.
have you used that? So yeah.
Yeah. So I think one example there is, back at Shift, like we got to the point where we're doing, hundreds of appointments, every week, and we had like a good amount of data that was just kind of flowing in through our like internal database.
Mm-hmm.
So as head of field operations, right, I had over 100 people under my org, and these
Mm-hmm.
people were running around everywhere, right, to deliver cars, pick up cars, and do miscellaneous things.
Mm-hmm.
So as that organization grew, like we obviously became more cost conscious and tried to figure out like basically like the metric we were looking at was, how many jobs per day can this employee complete.
Mm-hmm.
um so I think like, we basically had to figure that out on paper based on all of our appointment data. And I need to figure out too, like, okay, like, how do we kind of, I don't want to say squeeze out, but like get the most out of our employees,
Hmm.
balancing like, okay, like they have, this amount of productivity, but then also like, I think it's important to note that, these people are also like humans, right? Like
Yeah. Hmm.
you
Yep.
can't like, there's a certain limit to where productivity might be over indexed and can
Yep.
like cause other issues to your business. So I think worth calling out, like that's something that doesn't lie in the numbers, right? It lies into, I guess, just like emotional, connectivity to your employees.
Hmm.
um, so I think one example there was that, you know um, since we're trying to optimize the amount of appointments we're doing per day, just like as like from total volume, right?
Hmm.
We basically needed to staff during the times where our customers ultimately wanted their appointments. Because
Hmm.
essentially, like on the, let's say on the Shift website, right, they would select their preferred time window.
Yeah.
A lot of people, for example, on weekdays, after work, that was like a preferred time, like at
Hmm.
6 p.m., 7 p.m., for
Hmm.
obvious reasons.
Hmm.
And then weekends, a lot of people, for example, wanted to do test drives in the early morning Saturday around like 7 a.m.
Hmm.
And then same thing for Sunday. And then beyond like 12 p.m., you would see demand taper off.
Hmm.
So the challenge with that was like, okay, how do I, have this kind of workforce of 100 people and actually match it to the demand that our customers want?
Hmm.
So we can, with the hypothesis of like, okay, if we do that, then we can generate a lot more appointments per day because
Got it.
that's when customers want it.
Got it.
Because what we also saw too in the appointment selection was that if a customer couldn't get their preferred time, then there's a chance that they would either book it in the future or not even book at all.
Hmm.
So there's definitely a drop off.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I leverage like appointment data to better influence how I staff people in the organization in field operations.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that example. I think it actually resonates with me very well. Like
Yeah.
the current company that I work in, it's very similar. Like there's
Yep.
capacity, there's window bookings, there's deliveries.
Hmm.
So very similar. So I totally
Yeah.
understand where you're coming from. But I guess I'm just curious, did you work with like is there like a data team, or did you actually query and pull your own data, or like what how did you get that access to information? I guess that's
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I first started doing this, we did have a data team, but they weren't supporting operations.
mm,
I think they were more supporting like product analytics. So yeah, so like basically it was unattainable for me at the time, just because of like overall support resourcing.
mm,
So I had to self learn SQL, and I took a couple free boot camps to
got it,
kind of like learn it myself, and then ultimately I got access to Periscope, which was our like analytics tool that we're using,
got
and
it.
started building my own queries and dashboards and charts. And then I also spent a lot of time just like kind of reading through all the SQL of like existing charts and figuring
Hmm.
out, okay, like this chart has XYZ data and this chart has ABC data, and like if you link them together, then we can figure out appointment time by customer or something like that.
Yeah. Cool.
So a lot of it was self-learning, just because I needed that data at scale to ultimately become a better operator, right?
Hmm.
Because essentially, like I would be kind of operating blindly because I didn't have
Hmm.
any, data to look at to see, okay, are we doing better? Are we doing worse? Like, what's the deal here?
Yeah, but I think that's the perfect example of you got to be scrappy, right? Like
Yeah,
if I don't have a dedicated resource, I'm gonna go pick it up and learn it myself, and I'm
yeah,
gonna
pretty
go
much.
do it, right? Like yeah, I've actually that's super interesting. Like a few different sort of like product managers that I've also chatted with too. Like they know enough of SQL, they could get around and do their own
Hmm.
things too. I guess that's a pretty powerful skill set. So yeah, cool. Yeah, maybe we can transition to more of having the opportunity, now and before to lead so many people, right? I'm sure you have also been in the process, right, of hiring people, right? So
Hmm.
being a hiring manager, right? I think for sure, a lot of viewers who might be new graduates, right, who might be also thinking of transitioning to a new career, right? So maybe potentially they're trying to get into operations management or program management or product management, right? I guess we could just talk about what are some like key skills or qualities, or like what do you look for as a hiring manager? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I would definitely caveat that I think it depends on the role, but I think there are some kind of universal skills that everyone can work on, and that I can highlight based on what I've seen.
Mhm.
I think number one seems super obvious, but like communication is super critical wherever you go, whatever role you take. And reason being, right? Like I think there's like different levels of communication. Obviously, one is active listening, understanding, like let's say if you're in an interview, understanding the interviewer's question before you answer, and also like understanding their point of view and like what they're seeking, so that way you can kind of mesh your response to what kind of what they want.
Mm.
That's a very specific approach in, like, I guess, interviewing, but I think it pertains to anything, even with coworkers, right? If you have a disagreement and you want to kind of get their buy-in on a certain proposal, then I think it's important to understand like your audience, and then kind of dictating your communication to them specifically.
Mm. Got it.
So I think that's one thing. One thing too that I've seen that kind of ties into communication, but the ability to articulate certain thoughts very clearly and concisely.
Mhm.
Because if I've seen a lot of people kind of junior in their careers where they would ramble on and on and on, where they could, where their punchline could have just been 5 words, right, instead
Mm.
of 100 words.
Mm.
Um, I think it's important to like get your point clearly across and really focus on not so much what you're saying,
Mhm.
but then how other people are understanding you.
Mm.
Because if people are not understanding you and you're saying so many things, then it just doesn't add any value to anyone.
Mm.
So I think like that, yeah, that being able to be concise with your ideas and to focus on people understanding and not just like kind of absorbing all your words that you're saying.
Got it.
Make it easy for your audience.
Yep. Yep. So
Um,
so communication and sort of be short and concise to the point, basically. You would
yeah,
bring it to that. Yeah. Are there are
yeah,
there, are there any other thoughts or any other qualities or traits you think you look for?
yeah.
Communication is one. So.
I think one thing too is one thing I really value is like being a generalist. And like what that means is essentially, everyone obviously has their own role at a company, right? Whether it be a data analyst, whether it's a product manager or an engineer. But I think like, obviously you need to be an expert at whatever category you're searching for in your career. But then you also want to understand what is the bigger picture behind things, right? So for me, when I was a car enthusiast, right, sure, my sole role was to deliver a great experience to that customer, and hopefully that customer would buy the car. But then, what is the total business that I'm in? How does Shift make money?
Mhm.
I think these are questions that I think anyone should be naturally curious about, and like always,
Mhm.
like kind of not be skeptical, but kind of understand what people are, what why people are doing things instead of
Mhm.
just like what. Because I
Mhm.
think that will help you understand how to do a better job in your role, since you have that context of like, okay, maybe Shift, like a lot of the revenue came from financing insurance, like maybe I should focus my time as a data analyst on financing insurance, and like how do we make that more efficient.
Hmm. Hmm. So it sounds like actually, it's usually it's a hybrid, right? It's like almost like business acumen and curiosity,
Yep.
right? Like
Yeah.
you just always ask why, right?
Yeah.
Instead of just be like, what, or I have to do this, right? You have to why. Why are we doing this? Like
Right.
why?
Exactly.
Uh, uh, that's good, good. So mainly sort of like curiosity, communication, right? Um, I guess for people, of course, like sort of new grads, right? Like you've been in that boat, I've been in that boat, right? Like how, what's your perspective on like how they could build, their communication skills, or maybe your thoughts to building, how can they be more short and concise to their ideas? Um,
Hmm.
what 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 help you maybe, or you think can help others in these?
Yeah. I think one thing that helped me a lot in my career was, for example, in meetings, right? When you meet someone, like there's usually an objective, and you probably shouldn't be having that meeting if there's no objective. But um, yeah, so I think like understanding the meeting objective, like literally writing down like what you want to cover in that meeting, I think that will help you kind of flesh out your thoughts. You kind of visualize like, okay, like, this is what I'm going to say in this meeting. Like, does it make sense? And then you can kind of like go back, edit it, and then just make sure that what you're actually planning to communicate is clear to your audience. So I think that's one thing like that's super tactical, and I still do this like until today, especially with very big meetings, especially with stakeholders I've never met yet.
Hmm.
Um, and also like I think back to the point around like knowing your audience, like understanding what their role is in the company, or maybe it's like if you're networking on LinkedIn, understanding their background. It's like very simple, right? Like, okay,
Hmm.
like what is this person passionate about? Where is their, like, where do they work with, or where do they work before, where do they work now? I
Hmm.
think those are important data points to where you can kind of use those to generate engagement and conversation,
Hmm.
and really understand like what their point of view is on things.
Got it. Got it. So you, what you do is like you actually, write out some of your thoughts to clean the thoughts up, and then before that meeting, especially like you said, right, with people who are you're not familiar with at that time, right? Like you keeping an objective and keeping an agenda to
Yep.
why we're having this meeting to begin with.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah. And I think like obviously my example was more related to work life, but I think it's just with anything, right? Like
yeah.
let's say when I was a new grad, right, I was sending out hundreds of applications,
Yeah.
for jobs that I may or may not have qualified for.
Yeah.
Got a lot of no's.
Yeah.
But I think like when I try to network and meet recruiters or meet hiring managers for companies that I was like interested in working with,
Hmm.
um, I think it's important to understand that, and like really understand, okay, like this is what they're looking for in a candidate, and then how do I demonstrate that I can be a good fit for their company.
Hmm.
So obviously the job description has its own requirements, but then I think there's, if you go a level deeper, like, okay, what is this person value? Like, what does this company value?
Yeah.
And I think that will give you a better shot when you're looking for a job post
Yeah.
graduation.
Yeah. That's a good point there. There was a different video that I did with another friend connection on just look. We were looking at job descriptions, and then we were trying to give our own perspective on how each of the roles. A lot of times, like you said, right, like you, even though you might not be like 100% fit it, it's like if you're 60 or 70% like still apply, you don't know. Right?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
like if it's something you're interested in, like go ahead and apply for it, right?
Hmm.
So yeah.
Absolutely.
Was there any special techniques that you help you at least for networking? Maybe we could talk about that too, like
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, so it's kind of like sales, to be honest.
Mhm.
in the sense that, your easiest people that you network with are obviously your friends and family, right? Like the
Mhm.
people that you're closest with. So I think like, engaging with these people, right? Obviously, like you kind of you're meeting with them for a reason, right?
Mhm.
So I think it's like it's important to be like just kind of upfront and transparent about that when you're initially like reaching out,
Mhm.
like being like, oh hey, like, instead of like kind of making it unclear of like why you're reaching out, just being like
Mhm.
in your first like outreach, like, hey, I just graduated Berkeley, studied econ, and I'm looking to apply for X job at Y company, right?
Mhm.
I think just like being upfront there just makes the conversation a lot easier.
Mhm.
Because otherwise, it's like, okay, like, what does this person want from me, right? I think I get that impression when random people reach out to me on LinkedIn as well. Um, so yeah, I think that's one element. And I think like you should never be afraid to ask for introductions. So in LinkedIn, it's called like second degree connections.
Mhm.
Maybe Hubert knows a person at Airbnb, and they're hiring for a role that might fit my background. I think asking for introductions is always like fair game and on the
Mhm.
table.
Mhm.
But then obviously like you want to be. I think the level of rapport that you have with that person definitely matters because if I don't know Hubert personally, then like who knows if he's going to actually introduce me to that person at Airbnb.
Mhm.
But then
Mhm.
if I find like a person that I'm maybe it's a person I went to high school with, right, that works at Airbnb,
Mhm.
it's probably like a higher chance of like you actually engaging with the person that you want to meet.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you bring on a really good point, right? Like, people, the connections matter. And one thing I would say is you can always build connections, right? And
Hmm.
you can always,
Yep.
you know, it's so easy. Like, it's like me, my friend might be a friend with you, like it's like there's a
Yep.
mutual connection already, right? And it's just honestly one introduction away or a couple introductions away, right? And there's still a lot of opportunities. There's like a lot of jobs. It's just a connection or a referral is so much. It's so important. Like when it
Hmm.
when it comes down, like a recruiter reads so many resumes, and
Right.
they would look for the referrals first. So
Yeah.
uh,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah. Plus all those large companies, right? Like Google, they sift through thousands of resumes, per day,
yeah,
not tens of thousands. So
yeah,
I think yeah, networking definitely gives you that leg up, I think.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Awesome. Maybe we could talk about your venture at another time when you feel comfortable. But I know
Sure.
it's sort of also around this, hiring and talent and
Yep.
etc. So cool, cool, cool. Yeah, maybe just sort of to wrap it up, just some a final thought or any last words of wisdom for just like people who are in the job market right now, like could be new grads, right? Could
Hmm.
be people who are just trying to transition and do something new, right? Maybe it's two piece. Question one is if you're a new grad, you don't have all the experience yet. You're exploring options, or maybe you're unsure, right? Any words of wisdom there, or someone who feels that they want to just transition to program management or product manager. Any wisdom there?
Hmm.
So.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I think firstly, I think I would really try to understand, I guess, from the bare bones, why you would want to transition to a certain area. I
Mhm.
think the best way to do that is actually reaching out to current program managers, current product managers, right, and getting their perspective on things. Like, what does their day to day look like? What are the pros and cons of their role? I think that's
Mhm.
important to understand.
Mhm.
Because ultimately, I think you want to de-risk as much as possible. Like, okay, like I'm gonna throw myself, in this direction, use up all my calories, and then figure out, you get the job at the end, but then you're like, oh crap, I'm unhappy, right?
Yeah.
I think like at least I'm a strong believer that, people will, generally want to help you. So I think like just asking for that help and be like, okay, I would really appreciate if, you share your wisdom about your role and your experience so far. I think that would kind of give you a lot more color in terms of what you want to pursue.
Mm-hmm.
And I think once you get to that point, right, I think it's understanding, okay, what are the common skills or experiences that a hiring manager would typically look for in this role,
Mm-hmm.
right? So maybe it's for operations, right? You need, a couple years of management experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like there's definitely ways like around that, right, where you can get away with no manager experience for let's say like a supervisor role. But I think you definitely need to excel in other areas. You can't just fall short on a lot of the experiences that they require for a job.
Mm-hmm.
So I think like really like if you get the call, with a recruiter for a screen,
Mm-hmm.
just really like double downing on like what you're really good at.
Mm-hmm.
But then just like obviously like also be cognizant of like what you need to focus on professionally.
Mm.
Um,
Got it.
I think last thing I would add too for like job searching is it's definitely easy to beat yourself up, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
after Cal, I applied for 200 jobs. I probably got a few phone screens, which didn't really lead
Mm-hmm.
anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think it's very easy to be like, okay, like no one really wants me.
Mm-hmm.
I think you also have to be, you have to realize, yeah, like you have to figure out how to make yourself stand out, whether it be,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it's a personal referral, or maybe it's something super extraordinary in your resume that's very unique to you.
Mm-hmm.
I think you always need to figure out, okay, like, um, figure out how to optimize your job search and make sure like you're getting responses back.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I'd say, yeah, definitely be persistent. And I think, there's always a job open that fits your needs. It's just a matter of like, yeah, finding that job and company.
Yeah. I think really good point. Like same when I graduated my undergrad, I had a hard time finding a job as well. So I
Hmm.
went through so many interviews. Like it's good to go on interviews, but every interview, you get through and then you don't get that role, it hurts, right? Like it's
Yep.
sort of like it's sort of a trickle effect. But back to what you were saying, like I think reach out to people, right?
Hmm.
Form those connections, right? Have conversations and learn, right? Like and like you said, stay persistent because
Hmm.
your career is long, right? Like it's not just
Yeah.
say a year or 2 years. But uh, yeah, cool. Yeah,
Yep.
thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it. So any last things, Kyle, or I'll let you go.
No, that's it. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Kyle. I'll talk
Thank you.
to you later. Bye.
Okay. Bye.